Talking with Jeff Culbertson today, and of course he needs no introduction other than the fact that he sits in that hort chair or the path chair or the turf chair. We haven't put you into entomology yet, I don't think.
I don't think so. No,
but
not
you
yet.
could.
I suppose I could, sure.
Especially since what we're going to talk about is on your radar screen because you're cutting down ash all over campus due to emerald ash borer.
Emerald ash borer, right.
So, Jeff, you are in removal mode on both campuses, I think, at this point. And people who don't really understand what's going on or the intensity with which you're needing to do it, talk about how many you think you're going to be removing, why right now, what you're doing with that wood, and of course, the long-term proposal or plans for are we recanopying some of those streets?
Right, right. You know, we have, well, before this week, and we haven't removed that many, a handful this week, we have about 306 ash on campus, something like that. So roughly about 300, which is less than 5% of our total tree population. So it's a relatively small portion of our tree population, unlike maybe some of the areas that we've seen that are really devastated by where it's a very high percentage.
Right.
The one issue with our ash on campus is they tend to be planted in concentrated areas. So, you know, 10 in this area, 5 in this area, something like that, versus kind of widely scattered throughout. So one of the things we're looking at, you know, the interesting thing about emerald ash borer is that it's, unlike a lot of borers that tend to go after trees that are in a declining state or, you know, we'll call stressed, but, you know, stress could be a lot of things.
Right.
But I think of something that's declining in some way. These are kind of equal opportunity. They'll hit healthy trees and sick trees and little trees and big trees. So from that standpoint, we are looking at trees that we would typically decide to make a change in that location regardless if it was emerald ash borer or not. So since we haven't really planted ash for maybe 10 years or so, we do have trees that are in the 40 and 50 and 60-year-old range that would generally be on something where we'd be considering removals regardless.
Right.
And they are showing some signs of decline like we would expect an urban tree to show.
Right.
So that's really what we're in the process of selecting those trees that we think are concerned from that standpoint and kind of moving forward with that maybe a little bit more aggressively than we would normally, with the idea that, just like you're saying, that once those trees come out, then we'll bring something else in to kind of re-landscape that area, re-urbanly forest that area.
So one of the interesting comments that you made is, you know, they are concentrated in areas. And I know with kind of traditional urban planting, it's tree-lined streets, they're all the same tree.
Right.
Are we thinking you're going to go back in with tree-lined streets that are all the same, or the whole diversity of species and some similarity is maybe a direction to go?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's what we'll probably, well, and that's what we have been doing. We've done a lot of work, especially on city or on East Campus and some on city, where we're bringing in overstory species, but it's a mix of overstory species. Right. Or if we're bringing in some evergreens, it's a variety of evergreens because we know they have some issues too. Right. So you're right. I think that's kind of a overriding principle is that if we're going to bring something in, not to say that there's not several of one kind in a particular area, but we try to mix that up.
Right, and so you're really getting out in front of this because EAB has not been confirmed on campus, is that right?
Yes, we haven't seen, and even with our removals, we're not seeing any obvious EAB, no little D-shaped holes or that sort of thing. But I think for any homeowner, you know, when you have the top of a tree dying out, and that's one of the, you know, EAB is kind of like, it has a lot of symptoms, but it could be 7 different things. Right. And so when we see some suckering or if we see the upper canopy starting to decline, then you think, well, okay, I mean, it could be that or it could be other things, lilac borer or something else.
Something like that, yeah. Right. And people, of course, always ask the question, can you go right back into the same hole? And I know you have the monster stump grinder. Is that a good idea, or are you going to see settling, or should people really think if they're going to have an ash or another tree removed, move that tree over a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Even with the big stump grinders, you can only get a small portion of the root system that's there.
Right.
And so, I mean, just for the life of the next tree, I think the idea is you'd like to get them someplace else. I mean, you have to imagine things like nutrients and that sort of thing have been
Right.
just robbed from that portion of the soil because they've had a big tree there doing that work. So.
Right. So since some of these trees are pretty big, I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming your chip pile this winter is going to be big also. I think you've been in kind of a dearth of chips for a little while. Yes?
Well, you know, it ebbs and flows too,
Right,
depending on
right.
what our work is. And so, kind of even if it wasn't ash, we'd be doing a lot of pruning this time of year, especially once we get past the first of the year. I like to kind of ramp up our pruning before spring hits.
Right.
So this is kind of our whatever wealthy time when it comes to chips. We have more of that. But you're right. I mean, that's one of the things to look at. You know, the recommendation is kind of 1 inch on 2 sides with the size of the chip, and we have a real shredded mulch, so it actually is much less than that. So I'm not worried about that. But you're right; it does contribute to the brush pile. So.
All right, excellent. And we, of course, will all look forward to seeing all those new trees come on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking for a big spring. We planted 150 trees with
That's
some of your classes this fall, so that'll add to it. So.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.